It is Thursday, not Friday, but Thursday, June 1st, 2023, and you're listening to the MMA Eco Live podcast. I'm your host, Chris Presnell, here live from beautiful Portland, Oregon. I am the owner of MMA Ecosystem, work for Tapology, manage some fighters, do a lot of different things, even some Lyft driving on the side, but happy you could find the podcast. I've moved it to this new day of Thursdays instead of Friday. And the reason for that was just to give everyone a little bit more time to be able to watch the replay of the podcast before we head into the weekend. A lot of times I'm like filming the podcast, and then by the end of the segment, there's like MMA events starting. Sometimes by the time you watch the podcast, the fights that we're talking about have already happened. So notice that there was some pretty good viewership last week when we did it on Thursday. So I think I'm going to keep it here. Feels like it works for everyone just the same, and hopefully we'll just allow more people to listen to it while the news is still relevant. You'll probably notice that my voice is a little bit gross today, a little bit scratchy. Was at a family thing this last weekend out in rural Colorado, where there are huge farms and fields full of allergies. And so got attacked by that and was getting sick as I was flying back on the airplane back to Oregon. So it's better than it was, but kind of stinks because I've been wanting to film a couple videos, especially reacting to Road to UFC, but no one wants to hear this voice talk, especially when it's more scratchy. So what am I going to do? I'm going to drink a sugary drink and pray that pray to the Lord to bless this drink to my body. Great. All right. So last weekend was crazy. I know for me, covering Road to UFC is probably like my favorite thing. Hey, before I get to that, let me just throw this up there. I'm going to get into Road to UFC in a second, but just a reminder to subscribe to the channel, like this video if you enjoy the show. And on this show, I'm going to get into kind of like the weekend of Asian MMA coming up, highlight different fighters that are competing and different events that you may want to watch for. And then afterwards, take your questions. So sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit there, but now let's get into last weekend a little bit. I'm going to put out a full video reacting to various segments of Road to UFC as soon as I can, hopefully tomorrow if my voice is sounding better and if this liquid death doesn't bring me back down to the grave. All it is sparkling water with sugar. So talk's a big game, but it's just sparkling water. But yeah, like Road to UFC, probably like my favorite MMA thing to cover of the year. I know this is just the second year that we've had to cover it, but last year it was like such a blast to cover. This year, also a massive like just barrel of fun for me to get into all that. I think for me, it's like a lot of these fighters. I know a lot of these fighters, and a couple of them I would consider my friends. And every once in a while, you get these weird fights where it's like guy that I know versus guy that I know. And I'm just like, I don't even almost want to watch because I hate seeing people I know and like having to fight each other for a UFC contract. So I feel always really heavily invested in it. This is like my relationships in the sport is Road to UFC. And last year, really like getting into like breaking the news of the tournament and a lot of the fights helped me to create a lot of relationships with fighters and managers. So, you know, I did a little bit of that this year too. Not as much. Part of it was that it happened so quickly, but one day definitely hope to be there in person to be able to cover it live. I've even got some invitations to do so in the future, which would be really exciting. But yeah, so like it was crazy for me because I had this family thing out in Colorado, which fortunately shifted everything an hour later for me, which meant that instead of getting up at 3 a.m., I was getting up at 4 a.m., which for an hour of sleep, you know, you take whatever you can get. So I'm waking up at 4 a.m., literally like 3:53 a.m., as late as I can manage, going down because we're staying in this, this Airbnb with other family members, going down to the basement to this room by myself, setting up my laptop and, having all this content prepared and then just diving right into it. And basically, doing the live tweeting, posting things on Instagram, updating Tapology's live results, all these different things like managing it. And then JCK starts an hour later, and I'm doing the same thing for that. And eventually it was just like, this is too much. I have to like pause or just like periodically check in on JCK. Because of course, like the more traffic is for me is for Road to UFC, but really exciting tournament. I don't feel like there was one fight that when it was over, I was like, that was a total dud, especially or even like the last fight, the Bate Bowl versus Kiwan Beam fight, like that fight was a lot more fast paced than I expected. Bate Bowl was throwing really hard and really aggressive, and it was good to see him feel like he was coming out of his shell a little bit. Kiwan Bean also looked really good in that fight, especially in that second round. And then, of course, it ends on that really damp note of the disqualification. But fortunately, at least like there wasn't a lot of controversy behind that disqualification. You could argue that maybe it happened so fast and Q1 being didn't really like understand the referee's warnings. He was just blasting away, and the referee was warning him, but then he eventually stopped the fight, lost by disqualification. So uh, no real controversy there. And Q1 Beam put out that statement afterwards on its Instagram. That was extremely classy, owned up to his mistake, congratulated Bate Bowl, and wished him good health in the future. So so we've got it was 2 days of doing that, 2 days of waking up at 4 a.m., going down to the basement. Eventually my nieces and nephews would find their way down as well around 6 a.m. and want to hang out, and where I would pause for a couple minutes and then play with them for a minute and then be like, all right, well, I need to keep working, I'll play with you guys soon. And then going up into like a bathroom somewhere, one of the few places that I could work and with my laptop out. But yeah, every single fight, man, just like straight awesome fights, great finishes. The Peter Daniso finish, amazing. The Tai Laka finish, incredible. Just really an exciting tournament. And I just know there's going to be so many like great, just like characters coming out of this tournament that are eventually going to make their way to the UFC. Some really highlight performances for me. I will get into a lot of that in a separate video, because that could easily be like a 20-minute conversation. And of course, if you have any questions about that, you can ask those in the chat. If it's a big enough topic, I may even just consider sliding it into the video that I'll hopefully film and put out tomorrow. So semifinals for Road to UFC, still hoping for those to happen on August 26th in Singapore. I have heard from one person that the deal to have a UFC event in Singapore is a done deal, and I don't know why they haven't. Maybe they're waiting for a headliner to be official to announce the event, perhaps. But it does sound like that is done. I've heard that from one person. And that source is one of my more trusted sources. So, we'll see. I would think we'll probably hear about that maybe in the next 2 weeks or so. I wouldn't be surprised if that was even this week. I mean, it's only 2 months away, a little over 2 months away. I guess almost 3 months. But you'd think that they'd want to get that announced and be able to start selling tickets to that here soon. Okay. So, you guys see this breaking news just now? About an hour and a half ago, I'm out doing a Lyft drive, and I see that, of course, it's not during the drive; it was right before the drive. But that Jailton Almeida is going to fight Curtis Blades at a UFC Fight Night event in Sao Paulo, Brazil, on November 4th per MMA Junkie. Love this fight. I feel like of all of like the ranked heavyweights outside of the champ John Jones, that Jailton Almeida's biggest test might be against Curtis Blades, someone who is big and athletic and can potentially stop his takedown. Who's going to get the first takedown in this fight? Probably Almeida will be the favorite going into this fight just because he's on this win streak. He's on a roll. He looks so dangerous and deadly right now. It's just so hard to pick against him. But yeah, Curtis Blades, one of the most oft forgotten parts of the heavyweight title picture, and and he's had a lot of opportunities. He's come up short in some of his biggest moments, and just like one fight short always of that title shot. But beating Almeida in Brazil would be like this would be a really big boost for him too. I don't know what's going on with the heavyweight division right now. You've got apparently Stipe versus Jones in November, but then you've got people like Chael Sonnen saying actually they're going to go with Sergey Pavlovich earlier than that. I don't know what's going on, and then you've got Aspinall fighting Tybura in July, kind of a weird, kind of a weird fight. And then you've got this Almeida Curtis Blades fight going on later. Probably, I'm thinking Cyril Gahn in the main event of UFC Paris against, gosh, who? I mean, typically I would put him up against Pavlovich. That makes the most sense, right? Fight for a number one contender spot, but I don't know what's going on with heavyweight. It's really weird right now. Then if John Jones retires, then it's all of a sudden wide open. He said that he might retire after this next fight against Stipe. So that happens. Who knows what's going to happen with heavyweight? Very strange. Let's get into some Asian MMA. Honestly, a pretty light weekend overall. I would say the biggest storylines for me are the Tajik fighters fighting at UFC Fight Night on Saturday. But you do have an event in Philippines called URCC. So if you don't know about URCC, they have primarily been the Philippines' biggest, kind of most important fight promotion for developing talent. And they, for example, like Chris Hoffman, who fought at Road UFC this last weekend, he was their welterweight champion. You've also had a lot of other fighters fight through URCC into other promotions like ONE, UFC. So Filipino MMA is at an interesting spot right now because you've got URCC, and the way that they're running their promotion is very strange to me, very strange. So these events are just like all over the place now. They're not just like a typical MMA promotion based in a region that's just like kind of funneling talent up to the top. They a while ago they started adding like boxing fights, I think kickboxing, but they now also have bare knuckle. They also have like this event. They have slap fighting at the event. It's like every single like you thought like one championship might be doing too much with all their sports, but like they are literally doing like every single like trend in combat sports, or even like I don't know, like are we considering slap fighting a combat sport? I mean, technically, yeah. I mean, you got two guys hitting each other. Uh, maybe that's combat. Not really. There's not like defending. I don't know. Whatever it is, whatever category it is, URC's like been jumping on a lot of these trending things, bare knuckle, and I just like you. So you have these probably very entertaining events to attend live, or even to watch on their online pay per view, but there doesn't seem to be this like energy towards like we're going to develop MMA for like Filipino MMA's sake, to develop like the top talent. It seems like the events are shifting more towards like how can we make the most entertaining event possible, which is like perfectly fine. Like they have no obligation to like to the UFC or to one championship or organizations that would typically be looking at their talent. But just some of these like fights are really strange. The main event of this URCC event is Will Chope, who's like a American guy, but kind of an Asian American journeyman, or not Asian American, but just like Asian MMA journeyman. He lives in Asia, fights at a lot of events, has fought in UFC, and he's just like kind of got that journeyman style record. But he is fighting in the main event for a welterweight title against. Let me pull up my sheet here. So he's fighting against Brian Paul, who, when I looked him up on Tapology, had an 0-1 record, and he's fighting Will Chope, who has like dozens of fights. So really strange fight. Then as I was looking down the rest of the card, it's mostly fighters that are like 0-0, one or two fights per on their record. Some of them don't even have like a pro record yet, and which again is like totally fine if you're trying to just match people up to have an entertaining event. But Filipino MMA, it just kind of makes me wonder, like, okay, traditionally this promotion has been like kind of the cornerstone of Filipino MMA. I know you've got like is it UBG, UGB coming up, kind of putting together some fight cards there. A lot of Filipinos fight in other places, but as far as like Filipino, a really dedicated MMA promotion in the Philippines to raising up Filipino talent, like there's not a lot there. And I feel like Filipino MMA is at this really weird spot that it's in this need of almost like a hard reset. And earlier this year, you had like all those Filipino guys leaving, it's that team, Baguio, not Morocco Force. I'm forgetting it, but basically, like, yeah, you had all those Filipino guys leave, and Mark Sangiao's team. I'm blanking. I'll blame the allergies on that. But point was, all these Filipino fighters, especially that are getting a little bit older, leaving their gym they've been training at for a long time and going to train other places like Jackson Wink. And there was a point, maybe like 3-4 years ago, maybe even longer, that there was a lot of really good Filipino fighters in one championship. Just for my own brain, I just have to get the name of this gym. I'm gonna feel like an idiot. It's like one of the top gyms in Asia. Like Team Lakai, Doi. Okay, yeah. So you had all these guys leave Team Lakai, and especially not just some up and comers, but like some of the older fighters that are probably in coaching roles in that gym. They're leaving. They're going other places, and then most like Filipino fighters have not been all that successful at the highest levels. Recently, Joshua Pasiao leaving or losing his title. A lot of fighters in one championship with the Philippines. Of course, Stephen Loman, glaring exception. Really, probably like the brightest spot in Filipino MMA right now is Stephen Loman. But it's at a strange spot. There's a lot of other Asian countries that are coming up. China, India, Thailand, Korea is booming. Japan, a little bit of like a transition period right now. So I almost feel like the Philippines is getting left behind a little bit in the boom of like Asian MMA right now. And it doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way. I'm sure it won't be, but Philippines traditionally is like a great combat sports country, especially with like Manny Pacquiao, a really like energetic, devoted fan base. And I'm just like waiting. I'm waiting for like to see what's going to come out of sort of like the phoenix that's going to come out of what's going on in Filipino MMA right now, because it is in need of a reset. It's some of these gyms I think need to look at like where are our like collective weaknesses, and I'm sure they've had those conversations. So they don't need me to tell them that, but like I'm just interested to see what's going to come out of Filipino MMA. Of course, I'll like look at the results for these events and like see who wins, see how they win, like see if there's anything coming up. But a lot of these Filipino fighters are fighting either one championship. A lot of them, honestly, in like UAE Warriors, Brave, traveling halfway across the world. Not a lot like going on, especially like regularly in the Philippines. So I don't know, just something to keep an eye on. Definitely, obviously, wish the best for the Philippines. The UFC was they canceled an event there. Of course, that BJ Penn was supposed to be in that event, but yeah. And then I think they did eventually go back there, but they haven't been back. So we'll see. See what happens with Philippines. Otherwise, let's talk about that's tomorrow. URCC tomorrow, online pay-per-view. You can look that up on their website. Tomorrow evening in San Diego, California, is Cage Warriors 149. So, why am I bringing this up on an Asian MMA podcast? Well, because you've got a handful of Asian MMA fighters. You've got Franz Sorman of Indonesia. You've got John Sargi from Indonesia. And then you've got Suni as well, who is from, it's not from Philippines. Gotta look this guy up. But anyways, so Cage Warriors, they do these San Diego shows, and they also Cage Warriors is owned by Graham Boylan. Graham Boylan also runs the MMA Academy, which recruits talent from all around the world, mainly a couple like countries that are needing some extra development, like Indonesia. He brings a bunch of the fighters to Studio 504 in San Diego, gives them a place to train, and kind of like, and also acts as their manager as well. So yeah, I've got John Sargi fighting Johnny Gill. John Sargi is 1-0. John Gill 0-0. So yeah, kind of. I think this fight is opening up the card. Then you've also got Franz Sorman, who is 4-0, fighting at bantamweight against James Settle, who's 3-3. So definitely Sorman, the guy to watch here. Sorry, Suni Imhotep is an American guy. He's going to be fighting Kovajan Kovaev. Sorry for getting that mixed up. But Kovaev is 3-1-1. He is a middleweight, and guess where he is from? He is from Tajikistan. So big week for Tajik MMA. Would be kind of nice for Indonesia if they could get one back in the bag after last weekend. Road to UFC didn't go well for them at all. So they can rebound, get some momentum back with a couple wins at Cage Warriors tomorrow night. So kind of cool. It feels like Indonesia is like kind of this like singular like. It's like they're almost like a team. Their whole country of fighters is a team in a lot of ways, and they show up at these events and they compete. So kind of cool. We had I think 2 Indonesian guys at the Cage Warriors Rome show. So I expect we'll see a lot more Indonesian guys fighting at Cage Warriors events throughout the rest of the year, and that's really like perfect for them, right? They need to get out of the country, fight fighters of different backgrounds, so get used to the travel, all of that, time zones. So really looking forward to that. I'll definitely be checking in on that Cage Warriors event, seeing how the Indonesian guys do. But speaking of Tajiks, massive week for Tajik MMA. Man, like Tajik MMA, just like it was like so quiet, and all of a sudden it's just like blowing up. So this week, the UFC, they signed Muhammadjan Naimov, who is a Dana White's Contender Series alum, Titan FC alum, and they signed him to fight short notice this weekend. And then against Jamie Malarkey, which is like all kinds of cool fight. And then they also signed Muin Gafarov to fight this weekend as well. Muin Gafarov, also Contender Series alum. It wasn't until Nurullo Aliyev that finally they got a guy into the UFC. Of course, he was the first Tajik fighter to fight in the UFC. So So yeah, big weekend for Tajik MMA. Those guys all have like massive, massive followings, like hundreds of thousands of followings. So UFC is definitely like, okay, where's Tajikistan been this whole time? And they're wanting to get on that. Nurullo Aliyev's last fight had this like whole stadium of people watching it live from Tajikistan, which is very cool. And now they have two more fighters and probably more on the way if they can find them, get them into things like Contender Series. So yeah, really excited about that. See how those guys do. They're very good. I expect both of those guys should be successful. I think the Naimov versus Malarkey fight. Malarkey's going to be a pretty tough opponent. I don't know if he's going to be able to get past him, but Gafurov, I think that he could be pretty successful in the UFC. So that's UFC Vegas. I think those are the only Asian fighters on the card. But yeah, sorry, I forgot to put up the banner for that. And then, of course, we've got, okay, no more banners. Tomorrow morning or night, wherever you are, you've got one Friday Fights 19 out of Bangkok. You've got Chun Roy versus Drex Zamboanga, speaking of Philippines. And that should be a very good fight, very interesting fight. Then you've also, this fight I saw just got added like in the last 24 hours. They had like a different fight and then now it got switched. This is Ivan Orakov versus Terepchi Dogok. So Dogok is a Mongolian fighter. I think he's fought for one championship in either like kickboxing or Muay Thai. And this should be like his MMA debut, I think, unless we're missing some fights. But I didn't see any MMA fights recorded for him yet. So Mongolian guy making his debut tomorrow. Chun Roy been with the promotion for a while, as has Drex. So this is definitely a fight that could have even been on an Amazon Prime card that they're putting on these Friday fight shows. So always happy when they do that, give kind of a fight that between two more recognizable names. So that should be a good fight. I definitely think like Drex Zamboanga could be a potential like fighter. Talking about Filipino MMA, like he could be a part of the future of Filipino MMA for sure. So I'll definitely be watching that. Other than that, like I would say, like most of the fights, there's a couple other events going on this weekend in Asia. Honestly, not a lot that I don't think are going to have a whole lot of consequence. Not a lot of like big prospects, at least that I know of yet. There's two events in Kazakhstan this weekend. MMA Series, which is a Russian promotion, is going to be heading to Astana, Kazakhstan, and they've got a card with some Russian fighters, some Central Asian fighters. No one that really jumped off the page to me, but I'll kind of scan through it and see if any of the fights end up being, any good finishes, things like that. Alash Pride, which is a pretty solid up and coming Kazakh promotion. They've got a show on Sunday that's in Kentau, Kazakhstan. And then you've got Pancrase 334. That's going to be going down Sunday or late Saturday night as well from Tokyo. Again, not a lot on those cards that really like jumped off to me of like this is a prospect that I'm going to be watching. So probably just going to check in on the results on those to see if there's anything interesting going on. So yeah, and then later this month we've got one Friday Fights 11. Got Ryoji Kudo, kind of the next wave of PFL fights with our Asian fighters on those. Ryoji Kudo, Jo Sung Bin, Yoko Higashi. Of course, we got Arichi Lung fighting at UFC 289. Got one Pride Fight Night. There's some okay events going on. Kind of waiting to see if one adds any more fights, MMA fights in particular, to that Friday fight show with the Arjun Bolin and Anatoly Malikin fight on it. Interested to see if that's just going to be like a normal fight card with a couple title fights at the top, or if they're going to like stack it like an Amazon Prime card, kind of top to bottom. So let's get into your questions, you all. I'm sure you all are having like the best time hearing my scratchy voice so far. So my man Kendris, always appreciate your feedback, man. Really enjoyed Road to UFC. The fights were fantastic. Senko and Gooden were a great booth again. I just don't understand why I don't see the promotion for it on social media. Maybe you can explain why. I did see like last year it was almost nothing on social media for Road to UFC. What what I'm like understanding on Road to UFC is like they actually do promote it pretty hard in a lot of other markets. Like as I was on Chinese social media, like it was like everywhere. It was everywhere, everywhere, all at once, all the time. It was like all over Migu. It was all over Douyin, all over Weibo, WeChat. Like it was pretty like intensely talked about. And of course, it's you go on like UFC Korea Instagram channel, UFC Japan, uh, Twitter or UFC Asia Twitter account. Like it is really big for other markets. As I mean, duh, but like Mola Sport in Indonesia covers it pretty intensely. So there is a lot more promotion on the Asian markets. I do wish that there would be more on the English speaking side of things. I did see like like on a lot of UFC broadcasts, they would have like John Anik, like shout out Road to UFC coming up in like a week or two. Uh, and then I do remember like when Dana White films those like mega announcements to announce on Instagram. So I think when in one of those same sittings, he recorded like, hey guys, just want to let you know that Road to UFC is coming up, and we just announced like all the fights, blah 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 blah. Like, um, and that was on a lot of like Asian UFC channels. So like Dana White did like give a little bit of his voice to it, and they just like didn't like you think about like Contender Series. What does Contender Series usually get? It obviously gets like some of the like the little banners at the UFC broadcast, but usually gets like a couple like video packages at UFC events too, especially at the beginning, like before the season starts. So would have loved to see a little bit of that. Wouldn't have mind if they like looked at a couple of like on like UFC social media, if they would have highlighted some of like the biggest prospects from the season, or a couple different fighters that they kind of see like this fighter could like kind of steal the show. Which one thought that I do have is like when you have a tournament with all these fighters, it's a little bit risky like hyping up one fighter but that doesn't have a long-standing contract with the UFC, because they could lose and they could be out. And any kind of like promotional energy that they put towards promoting certain fighters uh, may not really go far. Whereas like it's easier to promote fighters if you're trying to like build people that already have UFC contracts. So I see some of the promotional challenges with that. However, I still think that they could find ways to promote the show as a whole, the brand as a whole, and try to get people to watch that. But I did notice a little bit more. I would say quite a bit more this year than last year. But the show has really taken on a life of its own in Asia. So uh, I don't know. I think you'll see a lot more of it if you live in some different countries. What did you think of Tai Laka Nuraji's left elbow KO? Do you think that elbows entering the clinch and the pocket could be the future MMA move? As Jack Slack stated. Uh, yeah, Tai Laka, man, he was one of the biggest overperformers for me, for sure, of Road to UFC. I thought that he was going to be overmatched against Kim Hunsel. I wasn't like 100% sold on Kim Hunsel, but he did like he looked decent in his last Road to UFC performance. He submitted his opponent, and I just thought that like Tai Laka was going to be outgunned and outsmarted. Just like Tai Laka is so young. He's 20 years old. He has fought some pretty good fighters so far in China. He hasn't fought nobodies. He actually fought pretty far into the JCK season last year, and he has just kind of shown that he's a little bit green. Now, he has some really, really good, like, innate strength and some pretty good timing. And in addition to that, he uses a pretty diverse set of weapons. So he has some really good natural giftings that if he's fine tuned and he matures the right way, like, he could be like a pretty big, like, star in the UFC. But I just wasn't quite sure of that yet. Kim Hunsel was a really good test, and man, those guys just standard and traded. Uh, but it's not like that lead elbow is like the next big thing. I, I wouldn't mind, like, kind of seeing Jack Slack's thoughts on that, but um, yeah, I mean, he just clocked him with that elbow, and one of the most devastating knockouts I've seen all year. Absolutely, like one of the best fights and KOs of the year, hands down. So, yeah, Tai Laka, he's just dangerous from so many different ways, like the kicks, the teep kicks, the clinch, the elbow. Like, he's rangy, really dangerous guy. Hard to train against a guy like that if you're Kim Han Sol, because you know he's young. You know he's probably growing a lot between each fight. You can't even bank on a lot of, like, his weaknesses because he's, like, so quickly growing and tightening up those areas. So really, impressed is such an understatement for Tailaka. I wouldn't mind seeing him fight in another non-tournament fight though. I'm not, like, totally gunning for him to get in the UFC ASAP. Personally, I'd like to see him fight one more non-tournament fight against someone kind of Kim Hunsel's experience level, just to get him in there one more time. You don't want to throw him into the UFC welterweight division before he's ready. So, very impressed with that guy. Um, yeah, kind of comparing promotion to a power slap for sure. Will there be any women fights on Road to UFC? I was surprised that we didn't get any non-tournament fights. My understanding was that there were just, like, so our non-tournament fights are pretty much flyweights and welterweights. There was just so many flyweights eligible to be in Road to UFC that they kind of just had to have a little bit of overflow into the non-tournament fights, and then they also kind of toyed with the idea of having a welterweight tournament, but didn't work out. So they chose a couple of those guys, put them in a non-tournament fights. I don't know why we didn't see any women. I would have thought, like, for sure you could have seen, like, Yan Hui, even Wu Yanan, bring her back. Rin Nakai. I know, like, maybe there was just something with each case where it didn't work out, but we absolutely need to have a couple. There's, like, it's so easy to, like, put together even just a couple solid women's fights. So yeah, I'm not sure. There'll be more of those non-tournament fights for the next round. Of course, there'll probably only be half of them because the semifinals will take place just as in one day instead of 2 days. So, two episodes instead of four. So we'll probably just get, unless they add two to each episode, they could do that. So hopefully, I don't know anything about that yet. Any update on the Singapore event? Yeah, I'm hearing that it's official. Heard from one guy that that's official. So, and I've, like, I mean, all the other guys that I know and trust that on Twitter, MMA news guys, they've heard the same things I have. So, some of them, even, like, before I broke the news, like, they would reach out to me and be like, "Hey man, you heard about this?" And I was like, yep, just about to share the news. So, it's definitely a thing, and I think it's a done deal. So just waiting on the UFC to announce it, coming up end of August. So it should be any day now that they announce it. They've officially announced the Sydney event. They've officially announced, which is September. They've officially announced the Abu Dhabi event in October, and that was a long time ago. So should be any day that they announce the Singapore event. Maybe they're waiting on a main event to come through. So I haven't heard anything official about, like, Max Holloway versus Zombie on that, but that would be my guess of what they're going to do for the main event. Wrestle Jamie, yeah, the Ejov having the je ne sais quoi. Hello, Chris. Rogue, always can count on you, my man. For Road to UFC lightweight or 70 kg quarterfinal bracket, who do you think has the most talent in that pool of fighters? Well, yeah, let's do that. So semifinals for Road to UFC lightweight. If I'm just gonna go with my gut, I'm saying most like unending talent, Shin Haraguchi. But I feel like the finals probably are going to be Rongju versus Shin Haraguchi. And in that fight, I would probably take Haraguchi. But man, Rongju looked good, didn't he, guys? Like my Korean friends were like hitting me up like, oh man, watch this. Hong Sung Chan, like he's a great prospect. And Rongju just took him out of there with that right hook. So it was cool to see like Rongju make a really big comeback like that. So hopefully he can at least get back in the UFC, whether he wins the season or not. Pulling for him to get back in the UFC at some point. He's still really young. Nothing like drinking sugary water and talking for over an hour to help your voice come back, right, guys? But yeah, I think Shin Haraguchi is probably the most talented. He was I know he won the fight, but a little bit of a loose situation fighting or no, sorry, I'm thinking of a different guy. Shin Haraguchi, he just looked so incredible. He's one of the least experienced fighters in this whole tournament. Understand that. And he just looked incredible last weekend with that sorry, with that takedown and ground and pound. He just looks so like vicious, and he's not like a massive lightweight either. So yeah, looking forward to what he can do. Bate Bull will be a tough challenge for him, but I still pick Haraguchi in that. I don't think he's going to blow through Bate Bull in the same way as he did last weekend, though. So yeah, Haraguchi for sure. Seen many people, fans and media, say that they like Lamos's confidence based on one interview. Whaley doesn't do any interviews. Does that hurt her public perception of confidence? I mean, we have fights, right? Like, I feel like that's the biggest show of her confidence is watching her fights. So, I think there's probably a bigger sample size. I don't think Whaley has any kind of reputation of not being confident. Do interviews of fighters influence who some people will pick in their analysis? Sure, definitely. People feel that all the time, especially like you think about fight week. Think about fight week, and you have these two fighters, and then we're watching them on Embedded if it's pay-per-view, watching them on Embedded. They show up to a press conference, and you kind of get you get a vibe from them. Sometimes a fighter feels flat; they feel a little bit off, and then other fighters are just like popping. Sometimes that's like not always a great thing. You think about sometimes Joanna or Ronda Rousey coming in just like storming, and then they get knocked out. But people take that and they ride that momentum for sure. And I've been guilty of that too. But I think you have to take a step back unless you see a fighter like limping across the stage. I don't think you can put too much stock in that confidence, honestly. People have a lot of confidence and then fall flat on their face. So, but yeah, people listen to that. Let's see. Where does Peter Daniso, or Peter Ha, as he's known in Bangtao, go from here? He's so young, and they were not clear whether he gets contract or not. Also, is Top Noi done going to the UFC? I don't think so. I don't think Top Noi is done. He did lose a split decision to a guy that a lot of people are saying is the top Mongolian prospect. He didn't look terrible in that fight. He's sometimes just like a little bit of a slow starter, throwing one strike at a time, and just can kind of like, that's not a great way to win a decision. So he lost that split decision. I think again, like if he were to win 3, 4 fights in a row, especially against a couple good competition, he could get in the UFC. He's a really popular guy. He is a great entertainer, and I personally really am like a big Top Noi fan. So I think the UFC would love to have him in the organization if he could just get a couple wins in. And he may even be like one of those guys that's like, maybe he's like just good enough to be in the UFC and put on lots of entertaining fights for us, and that's enough for the UFC. So I could see them signing him after even just 2 fights. I could see them going that way. They definitely, they gave him another shot right away. He's won. He's been successful after Road to UFC last year. So, and just the fact that they gave him like this one-off fight instead of putting him in the tournament shows me that they were willing to just hand him a contract if he won this fight instead of making him go through the tournament. So they like him, and I think they'll give him a shot if he looks good still. So, but as far as Peter Daniso, he's also a really young guy. He's 6-2 now, one of the most like electric knockouts of the year. But again, like, do they want to see him compete another time? If we're going like Contender Series standards, if that fight was on the Contender Series, he would be in the UFC. So, and same thing with Tai Laka. Dana White would be jumping to his feet, holy shit, all that stuff, and he would absolutely like be signed. It's kind of, I don't know. It's like interesting to me that like these one-off fights don't necessarily get the same pop as Contender Series, even though they kind of feel the same way to me. The honestly, like maybe the UFC doesn't see this talent as like quite UFC ready. It's kind of more of a barometer to see where are you at, and they're more evaluating if you're UFC ready. Rather, like Contender Series is like, if you win and look good, we'll sign you. That's like your sign of being UFC ready. So I wouldn't be surprised again if the UFC gave him another non-tournament fight. But I would love to see them just sign him and maybe put him on the shelf until the end of the year, and let him keep training at Bong Tao. So yeah, he's like 20. He's 22 years old, 6-2, really young, but he's had some good experience. I mean, he's fought for one championship. Definitely, that's a big platform. Looked amazing in this fight at Road to UFC. So I would not be mad either way. Personally, I would sign him, but we'll see. Oh boy, y'all love to y'all. Yeah, you have made it very clear to me that Yan Xiaonan is not a very popular fighter. Very angry with her recent comments towards the community and the fans. You think Hayes justified? I don't. Again, I'm just like, I don't step into that world very often of like what she is saying. First of all, I don't know what she said to the community. I don't know what comments you're referring to, but I I don't like, and of course, I'm not a Chinese person, so I wouldn't take things as personally as some of you all. So uh, you're perfectly fine to, if you don't like her, that's up to you. And but I just I don't understand the negativity towards Yan Xiaonan, but maybe I'm missing something. Um, let's see. Asu Amabayev, what do you think his best skill set is, and what techniques should we be watching from him? Let's take a look at Amabayev, shall we? He's a fighter I'll probably end up doing a breakdown, partially because I need to be more familiar with him and his skill set. So 17-2 record, 29 years old, flyweight out of Kazakhstan, and he has not lost a fight since April of 2017. Since then, he has been on a 13-fight win streak. So the wrestling is obviously there. He has several fights finished by rear naked choke. Some fights, he's definitely more of like a grappler wrestler guy. So he's fighting Ode Osborne. I I couldn't give you like a breakdown of him yet, but since you say that, I will. I'll do a breakdown on him before his UFC event, kind of like how I did of Rana Rudra and Patalima last week. I'll do a breakdown on Almabayev and kind of look through some of his recent fights, what we can expect from him. So I'm going to try to do that more with like, especially debuting Asian MMA fighters, so that we can know what to expect. But yeah, that's something I need to look at too. I've been hearing about him for a while. Haven't been able to catch a lot of his fights live though. Okay, so not giving some. I don't get the hate with Power Slap. Dana has put a great show, and people are complaining too much. Power Slap is cool, and people should give it a try before getting mad at Dana. I think if like you're a fan of that, you're totally in your right mind. I mean, we all like what we like, right? There are things that I like that I'm a fan of outside of MMA that people think are really weird, and sometimes even might think are problematic. And I mean, nothing's coming to mind right now, but like people like what they like. I think the biggest beef that people have with Power Slap that is frustrating to MMA fans is when it feels like it is literally taking the promotion from other UFC things. When the UFC uses the UFC like social media account to promote Power Slap, or when you go to the UFC website and like the top 4 articles are all about Power Slap. I think that's when people have a problem with it, because the UFC, like, they're not just going to add Power Slap content onto their existing content calendar. It is going to take the spot of other things, because otherwise you get a lot less engagement if you increase like your content count. So like the biggest thing was like, remember UFC 284 back in February? There was people were saying like, oh, there's so little buzz for it. And then you look at the UFC's Instagram account, and a lot of like the most recent content on their Instagram account was for Power Slap instead of UFC 284, which was like this super fight, like champ versus champ fight that should have been really, really, really big. So I think that's what people have a problem with, it is like when they feel like it's taking away. Also, like in the media, like I'm not gonna cover it. If there's like media that want to cover it, that's fine. But like when we as like fans feel like it's being forced upon us, this like totally different thing, feel like it's being forced upon us, and our regular like content flow of consuming MMA media, whether from the UFC or outside the UFC, like when that Power Slap content is just like put in front of us and we just have to like, so I know these are like first world problems, but like I think that's when it's frustrating, is when we feel like it's forced upon us and it's taking away. You can get into like the mechanics of Power Slap and like what it actually is. For me, I don't really have like I don't have strong emotions towards it one way or other. It is what it is. If people like it, that's fine, whatever. Um, but I do get frustrated when it feels like it is interrupting. You know, if I go to UFC.com and it's basically like PowerSlap.com, I didn't go there for PowerSlap.com. I went to see what are the new headlines. Tell me about UFC events coming up. So I think that's the frustration. But I understand your point. Like, if people don't like it, they don't have to hate on it. So yeah, Isaac, you work for Tapology, right? Do you remember the guy who went to the UFC and tried to fake his record? What was the point of trying to fake his record if he's going to fight hard competition? I know, I agree. You're talking about Askar Modrov, and And he's not the only one. Like you don't realize how much fraud happens in MMA with fighter records. It happens so much. There's particular regions of MMA that it happens a lot more often, and sometimes in like it comes and goes. But yeah, that guy, he like people will submit stuff to Tapology all the time where they're like, "Hey, can you add this fight to my record? Or can you take this loss off my record? This was actually another guy." Like, for example, and this guy fights with one championship now, Alisson Barbosa, this Brazilian guy. He has like repeatedly reached out to Tapology to get us to take this certain fight off of his record. It's a fight that happened in China, and we literally look up the video of that fight, that exact same fight. Everything checks out, and like the guy in the video has all the same like it's him, and he has all the same tattoos and everything. But he like insists that it's someone else. Like this happens all the time. And for the record, one championship is counting that fight. Like they, I think, actually don't quote me on that, but uh, it's just it happens all the time. Fighters think that they can get ahead by, especially like if they can like find some like really small backyard promotion and kind of work off that and fake it that way. A lot of like what has plagued Indian MMA a lot, and I've like even written about this, and I bring this up because we had Sumit Kumar fight last weekend, who exceeded my expectations. I'll get into that in the Road to UFC video, um, but yeah, Sumit had fought against guys, and basically his opponents, he worked it out a deal with them where it's like, hey, compete under a different name, and that way you can fight without getting a loss on your record, and then you can basically just throw the fight and I'll get a win. Everything works out, you get paid, all this stuff. And that happens so much more than we want to believe. It's happened a lot in the UK recently, happens in Russia, sometimes happens in Central Asia. Guys, it is a big problem. And at Tapology, like we scrutinize the crap out of videos now. Like sometimes results just get sent to us and we don't have video, but like we more and more just like really like Tapology is so like they are so intense about this. And I've even been like trained on like, here's what you look for in a fight to see if it's fake. Like obviously there's the real obvious ones when someone just obviously takes a dive, but like look at the commission, look at just, what's going on around the cage as the fight's happening. Is the referee legit? Like make sure that the picture of the fighter that comes up matches the picture or matches what the fighter actually looks like. And that's why like as often as possible we try to put pictures on fighter profiles so that we don't have these mismatches of names. I don't know how, Askar Mojarov, he must have thought that like he can just kind of slide in a couple more wins with like really unknown promotions that people can't really fact check, and then that'll get him to the UFC. But the thing is like fighters have so much belief in themselves that so many of them think if I could just get in the door to the UFC, then I can make it. But for him, like he got what he wanted. He got into the door of the UFC, but it did not work out well for him. He got beat really quickly. So fighters need to think about that. And then what are you left with? Once you get knocked out in the first round in the UFC, all of a sudden all these wins are taken away from your record. Promoters don't want to work with you because of your bad reputation. Then you're in a way better spot or a way worse spot than you could have ever began with if like you just worked your way up the way other fighters do. But Sumit, he could have been in a similar situation. He's a lot younger in his career to where he can still save his career. He can still actually he can still like as a 22-year-old, he can go back to Uriah Faber's promotion or LFA, get a couple wins over some lower ranked guys that are still respectable competition, and he can still like build a great career for himself. But I just like, for any fighter watching this, just don't try anything fishy. It's not going to help you like you think it will. Let's see. Wasn't Will Chope the only high profile you saw to bust for the UFC in 2020? Seems like a mismatch. Absolute mismatch. Yeah. So Will Chope, yeah, I didn't realize he fought in the UFC as recently as 2020. Will the Kill Chope, 41-19 record. Jeez. He's fought in Lithway, boxing, Muay Thai, and bare knuckle in MMA. And he last fought in the UFC. No, it's been longer than that. He last fought in the UFC. Gosh, was it that long ago? Gosh, his last UFC fight, guys, 2014 against Max Holloway. He lost by TKO in the second round. Before that, he was on a ridiculous win streak, like a 14-fight win streak. Yeah, he's only Will Chope is only 32 years old. I thought he was in his 40s. Good Lord. Okay, that guy he's been around for a long time. He is one of the most active fighters you'll ever find, guys. He's only been a pro since 2010. In 13 years, he's fought 60 times. Ridiculous. Let's see. Is the UFC suffering from success? What do you mean by? I don't know. What does it mean to suffer from success? Does it mean that? I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that. Let me make sure everything's hooked up here. Suffering from success, man. I'd like to suffer from success. You think that they are believing too much in their own success? Is that what you're asking? I wonder if sometimes I wonder if they are believing too much in their own success, to where, like, earlier this year, something that kind of aggravated me too, was like UFC was like, or I think it was someone with ESPN. They raised the UFC pay-per-view prices up to like what, $80 or something, and they were like, well, yeah, we just think the UFC pay-per-view product has so much value and it's like undervalued. Meanwhile, like, you have UFC 289, which is like, I mean, aside from the top two fights, it's a fight night card, a fun fight night card, but it's a fight night card. And we've had like UFC pay-per-view events, like the quality of like the pay-per-view card has not necessarily been improving. It's decent. They're often very good, but like, it hasn't necessarily been improving. And then you're putting up, I mean, sometimes they'll put like unranked heavyweight fights on a UFC pay-per-view card. And I sometimes think that like they think we as the fans will pay a lot more for what we're getting. And sometimes I think they trust their success a little bit too much. And it might work. It might work. They may not see too much of a drop off by raising pay-per-view prices. Wouldn't surprise me if, ESPN, if that price goes up at some point, Fight Pass, all of that, obviously, and like ticket sales too are just going up and up and up. I was like, they announced UFC 289. I was like, oh yeah, great. I'll head up there. I'll go to the show. No, it's like $300 for the cheap seats. And I saw today someone mentioned on Luke Thomas, his podcast, that like cage side seats for UFC 289 are like 10,000 Canadian dollars. Like, he's paying to 10,000 Canadian dollars for that fight card. Like, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Obviously, if they're noticing that their finances are dipping at all because fans aren't wanting to pay for it as much, they'll adjust to that. But sometimes I think that's the only way I could see that argument. But yeah. Do you think Sora Rachmanova has a similar style to her brother? What weight class do you think she'll compete in if she went to the UFC? She seemed bigger than her opponent. I could see like a bantamweight for Sora Rachmanova. I do think the UFC will pick her up this year. Either they'll put her on Contender Series, or if the UFC goes to Kazakhstan, I could see them just signing her for that card. Um, we've seen how the UFC will sometimes sign women's fighters having less fights, and for Sora Rachmanova, she's like perfect for that. I think that she could absolutely hang with some, especially some of the bottom tier level of UFC, like women's bantamweights or flyweights. So I do think we'll see her. I think that she has a similar style. She uses the clinch really well. She throws good combinations. Like her brother, has really good knees, some good boxing. So I do see a lot of Shavkat in her, which is fun, really exciting. She'll join Maria Agapova as a Kazakh in the UFC, but absolutely we'll see her in the UFC probably next year. Thoughts on Ismagulov versus Dawson? Seemed like an easy win for Ismagulov since he has more techniques and tools, but we'll do it in a decision. Yeah, I think that's probably my pick as well. I've been waiting to see every time I think Grant Dawson is like he'll have a fight, and I'm like, this he might hit his ceiling in this fight. He manages to like just inch past it, keep getting better and better. So um, yeah, Demir, he kind of like fake retired earlier this year, and then he came back. So we'll kind of see how that plays into things. Does he still really want to be there? Grant Dawson, younger guy coming up, like long win streak, really like has a lot of drive. What That's like kind of my one question. I know those are real intangible things, and when it comes to skills, that's a different thing. Uh, Ismagulov definitely has the skills to beat to beat Grant Dotson, but um, I don't know. That could be a closer fight than I think people will probably pick. But I would still pick Ismagulov in that fight. Heard that those Road to UFC guys going to be offered to Cage Warriors. So yeah, that totally makes sense, right? Because they're still with the MMA Academy, and Graham Boylan just going to plug those guys right into Cage Warriors events and give them a couple wins, and they'll be in the UFC. Totally. Man, is Cage Warriors going to go to like Indonesia? That would be really interesting, right? Cage Warriors ever went to Indonesia, but I don't know. I guess they would probably just keep doing their Europe and San Diego thing, especially if their goal is to like um, expose these Indonesian fighters to different styles, get them out of their comfort zone. Definitely, I think they're going to want to keep them outside of their home country. Uh, can can one can one defend a Cage Warriors title? Seems weird to defend that since it's only a small promotion. Well, yeah, there's been plenty of Cage Warriors champions that have stayed and defend their titles. Like understand Cage Warriors based in the UK, but they pull fighters from all throughout Europe, and then they're like I still don't really know what they're doing in San Diego, what like their goal is, if their goal is just to like merely put on fight cards with local talent in San Diego. But yeah, there's definitely been fighters that have defended their Cage Warriors titles one, two, even three times. Um, Especially fighters that y- like usually Cage Warriors kind of seen as like a pipeline to the UFC, but like yeah, Cage Warriors is not a small promotion. As far as like regional promotions, they're like bigger than UK. They're kind of like Western Europe. I would say like they go to Ireland, they go to Italy. Where else have they gone? I don't think they've gone to France or Germany yet, but I would. I guess Wales is part of the UK, but and they've gone all over England. But yeah, they're not a small promotion, and the high level of talent that they consistently crank out is like, I mean, they send probably like what 12 fighters to the UFC every year. If maybe that, I don't know how accurate that number is, but um, what other promotion is like sending that many fighters to the UFC every year? And usually, and a lot of like direct signings too. A lot of Cage Warriors champions that are directly signing with the UFC, not even going through Cage Warriors. So, one of my favorite promotions to watch. Some of the highest talent you'll see outside of the UFC, outside of one Bellator, PFL for sure. Do you ever listen to Migu commentary? UFC 275. Yeah, I saw that with Song Yadong with Sumo Darji, and they did a great job. Does Migu, I don't. Part of that is that, like, some parts of Migu, like live broadcasts, is blocked in the US. So I don't watch those broadcasts. I did see pictures that they did some of the commentary. That's really cool that they're giving more Chinese fighters opportunities to be on the mic and develop those skills. Love that. They that's like the Migu deal has been so good, and like it's given a lot of like really it's given a lot of like Chinese fans, I think, what they really are wanting. So it feels like they're serving that audience really well. So really cool, uh, really cool to see that. So hear the term ceiling for a lot of fighters potential. How do you measure a fighter's ceiling based on their fights? Isn't it impossible to determine how a fighter will do in the future? Well, yeah, I mean, I think we know like that ceiling isn't like that's not like a really like solid, like you can't ever like definitively declare how a fighter will do in the future. But when you start to see a fighter plateau both in their skills and like they can they can consistently not really like um, beat fighters above a certain level. Like if a fighter just has a hard time beating ranked competition, but can beat everyone else, you start to wonder, have they reached their ceiling? Other factors that could play into that, just like bad matchups for them. But a lot of fighters that will stay at the same gym for a long time, be around the same people, and then just like kind of like again, like compete at that same level and have a hard time breaking through that barrier. I think that's what we're talking about a fighter's ceiling. So doesn't mean they can't break through that, but it might require some changes. I think that's what we mean. Kendris, my infinite apologies. Uh, Sorry about that. What do you think of Whaley's jiu-jitsu coach, Josh Hinger? Yeah, winning double gold. Oh, I didn't hear that. Lemos and everyone else keeps talking about Lemos' coach, but they aren't talking about Josh Hinger, who is the best. Yeah, Josh Hinger is amazing, right? Didn't hear that he won double gold at IBJJF, but um, yeah, it's not just about the skill of the coach. I will say it's also about how can they translate that to their students, and it's also what kind of a learner is the student and how long does it take. Jiu-jitsu, it takes a long, like, there's a reason it takes usually at least 10 years for someone to get their black belt in jiu-jitsu. So having a great jiu-jitsu coach is great, but how long have you been with them? What is your relationship like with that coach? I think those are some of the other things, some of the other intangibles. That's why like every single fighter in the UFC, like not every great fighter will make a great coach or a great commentator or a great judge, great referee, things like that. Uh, bridging those gaps is, I think, what makes them really good. Would you ever get a green screen for your podcast so you can show some cool graphics or a fight poster in the background? Yeah, I. That's a good question. That could be fun. Right now, so right now, y'all, this is episode 11 of the podcast. For me, I'm still like kind of trying things out. Most weeks I try to like do something small to to improve things, try to make things more stable, improve image quality, make sure that don't have any like big interruptions. But I'm just in my like really tiny apartment. I don't have an office yet. Someday I hope to. Uh, I someday hope to massively, massively upgrade my camera. Eventually, we'll get a better microphone as well. But eventually, yeah, that could be fun to get to do like a green screen to show different graphics. If I could like, I know a lot of guys on their podcast, they'll just like screen share like an image and throw that up on the screen. I know it's like if I have a green screen behind me and I'm showing like a fight poster behind me, it's kind of like I'm going to be blocking a lot of that. So if you're trying to show like information, I think it's better to just have that, just to cut to that or to show that as an overlay on the screen. Um, but doesn't mean that like I've definitely I've like thought about like what about the using a good background for this. Like I've even thought about, and maybe this is probably a terrible idea, but I've got this deck that overlooks the city and you can see the mountain, like the volcanoes, things in the background. I've even thought about doing that. Like I'm not in this just to like literally replicate what other people are doing it just with my voice. Like I'm always trying to think about like what can I do that would be really fun or interesting and not too distracting. Like a couple of weeks ago when I made that UFC Singapore announcement, I was like, I want to make a video for this. Hopefully, like can drive some good traffic for my YouTube channel since this is like a breaking news kind of thing. And most times, like if you're announcing news, usually just like a tweet, a post, that's totally fine. Doesn't have to be super extra, but sometimes either if you're in the mood or you just feel like it fits the content, like I'm like, yeah, I do want to like do something a little bit different for this. We're seeing all these YouTube channels on MMA doing these really creative things, and like Black Combat is doing these really interesting like documentary style things, different ways of communicating information, and just thinking like, yeah, we can't all be like that, but just opening up the doors to like, are there other ways that we can have MMA media that is more engaging, more fun, like more appropriate to the platforms that they're on, and more entertaining too, right? Because that's why any of us are on social media, listen to podcasts, because we want to be entertained. It's better than sitting, it's better than doing other things. We choose that because it's entertaining. So I definitely want to think through that. And I want to think through, I mean, right now I'm just like, this is my reading chair. It's a nice like green chair. I've got my bookshelf here, a plant, a mug, things like that. Sometimes I'll like put a palm plant behind me, but I definitely want to experiment around a little bit, and I don't want things to get too boring or stale. Um, but yeah, if I ever buy a house, definitely going to look for like some kind of office or some kind of space that I can really design to be more engaging. But want to do things my way too. How hard is it to get Chinese fighters fights in the U.S. or in Thailand? Whaley uh, Whaley brought Zhang Shuai 4-1 record to her camp and said in the chat group that her management wants to get him a fight. Well, that's very interesting to hear that. I've been trying to get in contact. I need to get in contact with Zhang Shuai because I might be able to help with that. um, like literally, that's actually something that's been on my mind the last couple weeks. Is like, I'd love to connect with Zhang Shuai and maybe get him a fight. So, um, yeah, it is difficult, especially for smaller promotions, because the promotion pays for the flight. So think about if you're paying your fighters 2,000 to show, 2,000 to win for like a smaller promotion, maybe even one that airs on UFC Fight Pass. But that's like pretty normal, right? Sometimes more than that. Say let's be generous and say 3 and 3, 3,000 to show, 3,000 to win. And you can choose, you get the option to choose, do I want to choose someone that maybe lives in my home state, or a state away where they can drive 4 hours here. And maybe at worst, we have to reimburse them $150 for gas. Or if I can choose between that or flying a fighter in their corner and pay like $1,500 each. I mean, those would be at right now. I've been looking at flights from the US to Asia. That would be a pretty good airfare, $1,500. Um, but am I going to pay? So I'm going to pay $3,000 extra for that fighter, and so that I think that is one is the airfare is a barrier. Also, like getting work visas, all of that they are just more expensive for small promoters. For UFC doesn't mind, um, and one championship, not as not a big deal. They're used to that. That's what honestly really surprised me about promotions like UAE Warriors, because you look at UAE Warriors, they're flying in. I mean, they have like their Arabia circuit, but their main shows, their international shows, there's you think about how much money they are spending on airfare, it's often more than what they're actually paying the fighter, at least their show money, which is because and I know that because I have I've negotiated with UAE Warriors. I've had fights offered to me from UAE Warriors. So I know what the price tags are on that. But those events just have to be like so expensive because they're flying fighters in from all over the world. I think that's one thing. And I know like well yeah, they'll have fighters. For some reason like Asia is just like one of the most expensive places to fly over. I think maybe just because you're going over the Pacific, um, a couple connecting flights, but that's part of it. The visas. Also, it's just like a scouting department just may not have that connection with Chinese coaches. There's a language barrier. China use different social media than the US. So that could be part of it too. And that's honestly something as a manager, that's one of my goals for the future is to build more bridges between China and even Asia and US promotions. I would love that. And see how we can work out some of those barriers to get them more of that exposure and that experience. So you see fighters like Bate Bowl who moved to the U.S. for he's still here, but he moved to Florida, and he was for him he came with some guys from China Top Team, and they're basically like, hey, we're gonna move here. We don't even have a fight yet, but we're just gonna move here and we're gonna try to get Bate Bowl a fight. Eventually, they got one with LFA, which is great. Um, and it's worked out pretty well for him. He's at Killcliff FC. He's fought in LFA, and now he's in the road to UFC semifinals. So I think that I think if a fighter like I know it's expensive, but like I think some of a fighter's best shot is to get a manager that has the connections, or to save up their money and try to move to the US. So at least right now, that's how things are at. Um, I see a lot of other great questions, but I am going to go ahead. I'll take one more. Take one more question, and then I've got to roll out of here. Um, got something coming up here soon. So, but yeah, I'll take one more question. Thoughts on Lee Kai-Win's potential as a different kind of persona in comparison to his Chinese counterparts? Yeah, like how many Chinese fighters do you see with that many tattoos? Very few Chinese fighters even have tattoos. Tattoos sometimes Chinese folks, like you could definitely correct me on this, but like tattoos don't have like so I live in Portland. I've got a tattoo. Uh really hard to show you guys. It's a squid. But in Portland, it's like almost unusual to see someone who doesn't have a tattoo. It is just so normal. It's not everywhere like that in the US, but like whether it's just like small little cute tattoos like on your ankle, on your thigh, whatever, to different kinds of tattoos. But like tattoo perception varies country to country. Lee Kai Wen is just obviously like loaded top to bottom. He has a very different persona. I think he is pretty popular in China. I want to up his, think he has quite a big following on Douyin. I think that's kind of the best place to gauge what kind of popularity someone has in China. So he's got 18,000 followers on Douyin, which is good. It's not like mega following, but we'll see. That's something like, I mean, Chinese folks, obviously, I may not get to your question or your comment now, but like, tell me, like, is Li Wen like super popular in China? I know he fought in one championship for a while, but I think mostly it's like his performance that could be a game changer. He had that, his fight with Liu Kai was really exciting. Got a quick knockout. If he keeps rolling like that, like, yeah, he's absolutely going to be a huge superstar. UFC has had their eye on him for a long time. I can tell you that. It's just, yeah, a lot of bad luck going his way and a bad performance against Fabrizio Andrade. But I think the UFC sees a lot of star potential in him. So, yeah, I think he could be big for sure. That's it for me today, guys. Sorry if I didn't get to your question. We rolled for almost an hour and a half here, one of my longer shows. Appreciate all the questions. Really excited to see where this podcast goes. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please subscribe to the channel and like it as well. Hopefully someday in the future we'll be on different podcast platforms like Spotify and iTunes. For now, we are kicking it on YouTube. Glad you could join me for now, but from me in beautiful Portland, Oregon, I say so long, and we'll see you next week.